You've been hunting for a TV that doesn't just look good on paper, but actually holds up when you're watching a movie night with the family, catching the big game, or scrolling through YouTube after a long day. The worry is real. Spend a lot on a screen that looks amazing in the showroom, then discover the picture looks flat in a bright living room, the sound gets lost under the hum of the air conditioner, or the smart platform feels like a maze. I spent a few evenings with the 85-inch Samsung Neo QLED QN90D, checked the forums, and talked to a handful of owners who already have it hanging on their wall. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, size matters. An 85-inch panel is a commitment. It changes the whole feel of a room. If your viewing distance is at least 10 feet, the immersive effect is undeniable. The Neo QLED uses a quantum matrix with mini LEDs, which basically means the backlight is broken into thousands of tiny zones that can dim or brighten independently. In practice, that translates to deep blacks in a darkened home theater, and surprisingly good detail in a sunlit living room, because the zones can boost brightness locally without washing out the whole picture. I set the TV up in a medium-sized family room with a large window that gets direct afternoon light, and the HDR highlights stayed punchy without the usual halo effect you sometimes see on older LED models. The next big claim is the Neo Quantum HDR Plus. Samsung markets it as a step up from regular HDR 10 Plus by adding more precise local dimming and wider color volume. What I noticed during a binge of recent sci-fi series was that the color gradients in space scenes felt smoother, no banding on nebulae, and the reds in explosions were vivid without looking oversaturated. When I switched to a 4K Blu-ray of a classic drama, the skin tones looked natural, and the subtle textures in the background walls were still discernible. That balance between punchy HDR and realistic SDR is where the value really shows up, because you won't need to constantly toggle picture modes depending on what you're watching. Sound is a tricky area for most large-screen TVs. Samsung packed Dolby Atmos and Object Tracking Sound Plus into this model, promising a sort of 3D audio that follows on-screen action. In a real-world test, I played a game that uses directional audio cues like footsteps approaching from behind. The TV's built-in speakers manage to give me a decent sense of direction, but they are still a step behind a dedicated soundbar or a modest speaker setup. If you plan to use the TV as the sole audio source in a big room, you might find the volume needs to be turned up high enough that bass can become a little boomy. For most families who watch TV at normal volume and use headphones for gaming, the built-in system is more than adequate, but it's not a replacement for a proper home theater system. One of the hidden trade-offs comes from the 144 Hz motion Xcelerator. Samsung advertises ultra-smooth motion for fast sports and gaming, and it does keep fast pans from turning into a smear. However, the TV uses an interpolation technique that adds frames rather than actually increasing the native refresh rate. Some purists notice a slight soap opera effect in movies. Fast action looks smoother, but the cinematic grain can feel a bit processed. If you're a cinephile who prefers the traditional 24 frames per second look, you can dial the feature down in the picture settings. But it's something to be aware of before you decide the TV is perfect for every use case. The smart platform is Samsung's Tizen OS, now powered by the NQ4 AI Gen 2 processor. In daily use, the interface feels snappy. Launching Netflix, Disney+, or YouTube takes barely a second. The AI upscaling does a decent job of pulling older 1080p content up to near 4K quality, especially with the added edge enhancement. I did a side-by-side comparison of a 1080p sports broadcast and the upscaled version. The upscaled image retained more detail in the grass and had fewer jagged edges on the players' jerseys. The downside is that the App Store isn't as expansive as, say, Roku or Fire TV, and a few niche streaming services require you to use the built-in browser, which can be clunky. So, who should really consider this TV? If you have a dedicated viewing wall, a room that can accommodate an 85-inch screen at the right distance, and you value a picture that can handle both bright daytime TV and dark cinematic moments, the Neo QLED QN90D hits a sweet spot. It's also a good match for households that want a premium look without buying a separate sound system right away. Just be prepared to add a soundbar later, if you want that deep, immersive boom for movies. Gamers will appreciate the low input lag and the motion accelerator, but they'll also want the optional HDMI 2.1 features like variable refresh rate, which this model supports. If you're a minimalist who prefers a smaller TV or you're on a tight budget, the sheer price of an 85-inch Neo QLED might feel excessive.